Hey, welcome to Reset. This is the part of the week where we take time to reset our minds on God's promises, God's presence, and God's purpose for your life. My name is Sam. Today we are going to be continuing our series on the book of Acts, picking up in Acts chapter 5, and I'm so excited to share in the word of the Lord with you today. We're going to be picking up at verse 34 near the end of the chapter, but before we dig into that, I'd like to take a second and just talk about what's going on in this chapter. As we've been going through the book of Acts, we've seen that one of the main things that God is doing here is performing miracles and ministering to the lives of people through his apostles. And that's no different here in chapter 5. In chapter 5, by the power of God, after the first little section, we see that God is sending his apostles out to do his work and is empowering them to preach the gospel and to heal people. As this is happening, this frustrates the Jewish authorities. And because the Jewish authorities are frustrated, they end up arresting the apostles, putting them in jail. And then as they're in jail, God sends an angel to break them out. An angel breaks them out. They leave jail, and then they are quietly arrested again because the authorities knew this would upset the people. And so they're quietly arrested. Then they're taken to a trial. And the trial is where we're picking up here at verse 34. And so this is where we're picking up. Acts chapter 5, verse 34. And this is when a Pharisee starts to speak. But a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law held in honor by all the people, stood up and gave orders to put the men outside for a little while. And he said to the men of Israel, "Take care what you are about to do with these men. For before these days Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. He was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean rose up in the days of the census and drew away some of the people after him. He too perished, and all who followed him were scattered. So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or undertaking is of man, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to throw them. You might even be found opposing God." And so I want this last statement, "you might even be found opposing God," be something, I want that to be our focal point this week in our reset, is being in opposition to God. I think it's interesting that as we're reading this passage, this isn't an apostle speaking. This isn't a Christian speaking. This is a Jewish religious leader, a Pharisee, who is speaking, someone who is in opposition to the apostles. But he is somewhat recognizing what God is doing through the apostles. And he's having to question himself and say, is God actually in this? And if God is, he knows he has to be cautious. He knows he has to tread lightly if he is in opposition to God. And so I find that incredibly interesting. And that's incredibly interesting for us because this Pharisee is speaking up around people who I'm sure weren't even willing to entertain the idea that God was working through these men. But nonetheless, this Pharisee says it anyways. And that kind of reminds me of our situation in the world. We're tempted by our flesh to be at odds with God, to do things that don't please God. We're tempted by the world, the things around us, to do things that do not please God. And we're also tempted by the enemy, the devil himself, to do things that don't please God. But this Pharisee gives us an interesting example of how to genuinely look at a situation and say, God, are you in this? This is difficult, but God, are you in this? And God, how do I align with it? And I think even though this Pharisee is an opponent of the apostles, he still is trying to find God in the situation. And that's what we're called to do in our daily lives. I'm reminded of how Jesus talks in Mark chapter 8, verse 34, telling us that we are to take up our cross and follow after him. Essentially, we are to suffer for the sake of Jesus and for the sake of his gospel. We are called to do what he is calling us to do, regardless of how difficult the circumstance it might be. And personally, I believe that God intentionally puts us in those difficult circumstances. I've been in them sometimes, and I can guarantee you, if you haven't been, you will be eventually. And that is that God will put us in difficult moments so that we truly have to trust in him. God will put us in a difficult moment so that we are required to trust him in spite of maybe potentially losing a job or losing money or losing friends. God might put us in a difficult situation so we can learn that He is all we really need. As I was thinking about this today, and as I was thinking about this topic of aligning ourselves with God, even when it costs us something, I thought of a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Some of you may know him. If you don't, he was a man from Germany. He lived in the time of World War I and World War II. He was a very educated man. He ended up leaving Germany to go and travel and study in the United States and in England. And he travels out there. He was a Christian, by the way. And while he is traveling, he feels the call of God to come back to Nazi Germany and preach the truth in a country where the church had largely been compromised by the Nazis. And so, despite the great discomfort that it would cause him and all the trouble it would cause him, he comes back to Germany because God called him to. He comes back, he preaches the truth, and then he is arrested for it. He's thrown into a concentration camp, and he actually ends up dying about 9 hours before his concentration camp was rescued. Nonetheless, Dietrich Bonhoeffer is still actually influencing many lives today. But he did what was difficult, and it came at a great cost. He actually wrote an amazing book called The Cost of Discipleship, and no one exemplified that in our modern time better than he did, and that was that he was willing to lay it all down for Jesus. I'm reminded of how Charles Stanley says it, and that is that we should obey God and leave all the consequences to Him. As we conclude, I would like to read a section out of Proverbs chapter 3. Starting in verse 5, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord, and turn away from evil." And so as we're wrapping up today, I want to challenge you with a couple of quick questions. One, this is an internal thing. I need you to think about this and reflect on this throughout the week, and think on this even outside of this week. But that is, what is opposing God in your life right now? What is opposing God in your life right now? Maybe it's work. Maybe it's your phone. Maybe it's a hobby you're a little too invested in. Maybe it's a relationship. I know for me, sometimes it's my phone, just being honest and vulnerable with you all. But I want you to think about what area of your life might be standing between you and God right now. And my second question for you ties heavily into this, and that is that on a practical level, what can you do this week to better align with God? If you think of something, leave it in the comments for us. Maybe it's deleting an app. Maybe it's deleting Instagram or Facebook. Maybe it's taking time off of work, or not bringing work home so work isn't so much of a distraction. Or maybe it's getting up a little earlier, or staying up a little later to spend time with God. In conclusion, I want to leave you with that. I want to leave you with this idea that we are called to align with God regardless of what it may cost us. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you for joining us today on Reset.